When my daughters were younger, they had a little bit of a conflict. I don't know that I would call it a fight, but here is what happened. At the end, when my younger daughter, who had done something to her older sister, went to apologize or talk to her, she came back to me and she said, "Mom, she said she's fine, but her body says she's not fine." In a world where we really like to focus on things like STEM and learning math and science, I am 100% convinced that we should be teaching nonverbal communication. Research says that nonverbal communication is approximately 93% of our communication. It's 93% of the message. Now, if we really want to break this down, and I'm going to include an article from the University of Texas, a theorist or researcher named Marabian said, when we look at that 93%, about 55% is actually our body or our nonverbals. 38% is what we call our vocals or paralanguage. It's how we package it or our tone. So we've talked about there are 7 learning objectives. You saw that early on. So I want to kind of give you a 10,000 foot view of those. You're going to dive in and then make sure that you take your assessment. I also want you to understand that hopefully by the end of this, you will be able to define nonverbal communication. You'll also be able to begin to recognize it, not just in yourself, but in other people. So here's what we need to know. It's impossible to avoid. It is actually part of our identity management. How we present ourselves is sending a message. And then it can help us define relationships. So it can help us actually feel a part of a group. We've talked about co-cultures in previous modules. So it's important to know it can help us let us know where we stand. And finally, here's the tricky part. It's ambiguous. So sometimes we don't know what people's nonverbals are. Now, I'd love for you to pause this video, take a minute, go to page 81 in your textbook. And there's a quick quiz that just says, how nonverbally savvy are you? So how good are you at doing this? And so if you could just pause the video, go take that, and then come back. Now, here's what I want you to know. It is important to your success. If you want to be a great communicator, you've got to figure out how to interpret, to decode, and to be aware of your nonverbals. So let's go through some real basic things. Let's look at the functions of it. There are 5. So if you're taking notes, you can number this section 1 to 5. It's important for us to repeat them so people understand them. They can substitute. So if I want to say hi, I could just wave. I don't actually need the words. They can complement what we're trying to say, so they can add, or what we call enhance, our message. They can regulate. So if we're trying to help communicate something maybe intense, but we don't want it to be taken so intense, we can regulate that communication. They can also contradict. And again, that's where it can get difficult and we have to be better. Okay, so let's look at nonverbals and kinesics, which is the study of body movement. So I'm sure you may have heard someone say, I'm majoring in kinesiology. I am going to post in this module an interview or TED Talk with a guy named Malcolm Gladwell, who wrote an incredible book called Talking to Strangers. I actually listened to it on Audible because he's such a great storyteller. But here's what he says. He starts with the question, how can you tell if someone is lying? And he breaks down these incredible stories of people who deceived a lot of really smart people. And he asked the follow-up question, why is it so hard to detect deception? And here's the deal. He concludes, it's about like flipping a coin. It's fascinating research. This chapter is going to talk about how you can be aware, but the truth is, a lot of times we're not great. Okay, there are legitimately about 6 areas that we look at when it comes to kinesics. So I'm not going to explain them all, but I just kind of want to give you a heads up. So if you are taking notes, I would number 1 to 6, and I would think of when is the time I felt that or didn't feel that, or I want you to start paying attention to other people. So we want to connect this to our real life. So 1, your posture says something. If you're hunched over, you feel scared. If you're straight up, you look confident. When you're smiling, you're more approachable. People want to communicate with you. Fidgeting communicates often that you're nervous. Touch, when you touch someone, you're often indicating like, hey, I would like your attention, or I want to talk to you. If you watch a little kid come up beside their parent or the person that's in charge of them, you'll see them kind of touch their leg or stand next to them. I often train my kids because it's perceived as more respectful is just to say, instead of interrupting, maybe just to get close to me and touch my arm, and that will say, hey, I kind of need to talk to you. Unless, of course, someone is on fire. Eye contact, when you make eye contact, it's so important. This piece of kinesics may be one of the most important parts. There's a proverb that says that eyes are the window to your soul. It has to do with not just your communicating, but your effectiveness, your integrity, and finally, voice. How you use your vocals matters so much in packaging, enhancing, regulating your communication. Let's move on. We've got 3 more slides. So I want you to think about this, right? This space, time, and place that we forget communicates really important things. And oftentimes it communicates power distribution. It can communicate authority. So 4 areas: space, time, territory, and environment. So how we take up space in a room, whether we make ourselves small, communicates how we feel about ourselves, going back to that identity management. When we look at time, it's so important. You'll see the word chronemics in this chapter. And when you are late, whether you mean to or not, you communicate to that other person you're not that important. It's why a lot of employers for interviews, gosh, if you're not on time, it sends a really terrible message to your employer that, hey, I didn't prioritize this. So we really want to look at chronemics. Territory, I see this every week in my classes. Someone will sit in a certain space and sort of take up that space, and almost like a primal instinct, no one else will take that spot for the rest of the semester. That's sort of their territory. They've marked that environment. When you go to a work in an office building, you'll see it around San Jac. There are parking spaces that have people's names on it. So that communicates this message. That's theirs, right? And environment, how you set up your bedroom, your workspace, my office. If you take a walk down a hallway of professors' offices, I want you to think about how many of those are set up to say, hey, come talk to me. I would really love to engage. Or please don't ever talk to me. I'm here in a cave. So our environments communicate a message, again, whether we intend to or not. Okay, 2 last slides. Nonverbal cues and attractiveness. We talked about halo effect, but here's the reality. Research says there's an attractiveness advantage non-verbally. When we put ourselves together and we look our best, it sends a message that helps people assign other things to us. I did an experiment in college where my friend dressed like a homeless person and I got really dressed up, and we watched how people interacted with us, whether they made eye contact, whether we went to a mall, whether they asked us for help. So it's a real thing. Our clothing sends a message that says we could communicate, hey, I'm professional. I would not do this presentation in pajamas, and you shouldn't present any of your college presentations in pajamas either. Body art, what a world that we have with tattoos, that they create meaning, they send a message. Sometimes that can be damaging, sometimes it can be not. I have a good friend who has 2 World Series rings, and he made a mistake by putting a pretty unattractive tattoo on his body, and it made headlines. I will include it in this module for your viewing pleasure. Overall effect of nonverbal cues. We want to look at what am I sending out? What are the messages that I'm sending, and what is the effect it's having on my communication? All right, so finally, last one, gender and nonverbal communication. You'll be shocked to know, again, research on the whole, not necessarily, doesn't mean there aren't outliers. But when we look at territory, there are gender differences. So when we go back to things like taking up space, we tend to find that maybe men do that more. You will see in this module, I will post a TED Talk by Amy Cuddy, who does power posing research, but she talks about these gender differences, and I really want you to pay attention because it will most likely be on your quiz. Our media influences on how we organize gender and their nonverbal communication. And then finally, we want to look at this social structure and our commonality. So where do we overlap? Where are we similar? You'll see this in the chapter. So I want you to look at what are the differences? How are we affected by media and our current sort of social culture structure? And then finally, where are we similar? So I wanted to try to make this a little bit shorter, but if there if there's a chapter that I think would be helpful for you and developing your own self-awareness, I want you to take time and to ask yourself, look at all of those things, from maybe tattoos that you have or clothing that you wear, or how you present yourself, how you are late, or maybe you are early. Start to take inventory. Go back to that page 81. Make sure you've taken that nonverbal assessment to say, am I good at this? Am I not good at this? Now, when it comes to deception, remember, and this will have to do with your journal prompt, is oftentimes we're not great, research says, at knowing if someone is lying to us. But learning our own nonverbals can lead us to better connection and more positive interactions with people. I hope that you have enjoyed this chapter, and I hope that you feel a little more equipped to nonverbally communicate better.